Hi all, I have another wonderful game of Mikhail Tal to show you. So this was against Peteris Kampenuss, played in 1953, so 7 years before Mikhail Tal became world chess champion. We see Tal playing e4 and we get actually a royal of pairs, and the Berlin defense, which is all the rage nowadays at Super GM level. It's one of the more highly respectable variations, which has come very trendy. But usually here after d4, players nowadays play knight d6. It's thought to be good chances for both sides. This queenless position here, but in this game we don't have the queenless flavour of this variation. In many ways some might argue this is more exciting because the queens are kept on. Bishop e7 is another move played instead. D takes e5, and white has a certain amount of pressure along this d file. Knight c5, aiming for that blockade square e6. We see rook d1, queen e8, knight c3. Looking at knight d5, that looks very scary. We see black reacting with a6, bishop c4, and again knight d5 looks kind of a major concern because it's on c7. We see black lashing out with b5, bishop d5 now. Black ignores the potential for structural damage. Tal doesn't really want to take on c6. He plays a3, b4, now knight e4, and this knight is heading to the king side. Knight e6, knight g3, and now there's prospects of knight f5 or knight h5. So already it's starting to look as though there's some storm clouds brewing around black's king side. Black now does actually make a concession as well in this position, which is starting to look a little bit dangerous. Black plays f6. It does mean the knight's automatically pinned, the diagonal's weakened, and it prompts Tal actually to sacrifice actually a pawn here with the move knight h4. Remember, this is 1953. We've seen actually recently a Fischer game on this very channel where Fischer played a knight h4 to get to f5 and sacked a pawn, and here this is another dangerous scenario. Knight coming to f5 is dangerous for the attacking player. How does black actually want to take on e5 here? If we look at this position, it is hitting the knight. Knight f5 looks pretty dangerous. Possibilities include just taking on c6 actually for queen takes e5. So anyway, black actually took with the knight here. So this pawn, he's not leaving himself with a vulnerable pawn on e5. So what does this pawn sack do? Well, we see f4, and it looks as though there's a possibility of f5 now exploiting that pin soon. Check. Now black has to get out of this pin, otherwise f5 will pick up a piece. Knight f7 breaks that pin. So now after f5, that knight can actually move. Is this the end of the story? No. Queen c4, threatening the bishop, putting more pressure on this pinned knight on f7. Rook d5. Now bishop takes g5. F takes, rook e1, kicking the queen off the e file. Not too many choices here for black. Bishop e7, f6 looks absolutely crushing with knight f5 in mind. So queen d8, but alas, here there's a very strong move exploiting this fierce diagonal with that pinned knight. Can you see what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds, what would you play here with white, especially if you're Mikhail Tal for a day? Okay, knight g6. Yeah, the rook can't move because the bishop takes f7. So black actually is ending up playing now c6. And you might think, okay, isn't there a potential for, you know, playing d5, relieve the pin, or you know, taking, isn't that okay because there's d5 after? Not really, actually. Tal does take on f7, and there's actually two possibilities, both the same idea, which are really strong. Tal played the more spectacular of them. Can you see what Tal played? I'll give you 50 points for both of them, actually. They're the same kind of idea. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play? Tal played knight h8, and you may remember, some of you may remember, the amazing game Jerome Piquet, Netherlands GM, had this game with white against Garry Kasparov, and Kasparov finished with knight h1 and a king's engine. It was a classic king's engine defense game. So maybe that inspired, this sort of move inspired Kasparov in later generations to play this sort of idea. But technically knight e5 does the same thing. It doesn't matter about d5 because then there's still knight takes f7. In the game, we have the knight going this route. So d5, again, knight takes f7, hits the black queen. So white's just won an exchange. Now after queen e2, it's immediately threatening check, and if the king went there, then there's rook e8 check. So black tries to safeguard the e8 square. a4 hitting the rook, rook a d1. So both rooks in the center. That's bad news if you're playing Mikhail Tal. Usually. Queen f6. This goes straight into a horrible move, of course, here, which you may be able to spot if I give you 5 seconds starting from now. Okay, knight e4, because yeah, that pawn's kind of pinned to the bishop, but rook takes d7 is pretty strong. It would at least be the exchange up for white, but the king might be able to cause a nuisance. But this is very good for white. Otherwise, also, if you look at this position, if the king went here, then there's check picking up the bishop. But actually, Tal doesn't take on d7. He plays check here, and it's really dangerous. Because if the king steps onto a dark square, then queen takes c5 will win the rook as well, win the house, basically. So the king tries to stay on a light square here. And you might think, is the idea queen takes c5? That probably is good. It's still the exchange up, but a more aggressive looking variation is played. Rook takes e4 check. Okay, it's pretty grim, this position, it's got to be said, because if the king is put on the d file, then that's, you know, it looks as though it's just all over really. There's nothing for black there. So we see this bishop going back. So what was Tal's point here? At the moment, black's up in material if you count two bishops being more than a rook. Tal's point is the check here. This position. The king may be suffering from a slight overload in this position. Can you see what white plays now if I give you 5 seconds starting from now to pause the video? Okay, rook takes e7. Yeah, we can win that black queen here with this check now, dragging the king away from the protection of his queen. So white wins the queen, takes on g7. It's all over. This pawn is also imminently queening. So here black resigned. An interesting Mikhail Tal game. It also shows, you know, this old way of playing the Berlin defense doesn't seem as safe as the modern way, which is really to get the queens off, and especially against an attacking player. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would prefer the queens off variation against Mikhail Tal in the Berlin defense. So Tal's pawn sack seems to guarantee huge problems for black. Black ended up losing an exchange. Tal went for a variation where he forcibly won black's queen after. Hope you enjoyed that one and got something out of it. Likes, comments, questions, all welcome on YouTube. Thanks very much.